What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our round 4 live stream for the Bank of Utah Championship. Gonna get you ready for all of your DFS lineups, also any prop slips that you plan on entering as well, with a complete game plan for tomorrow's action. And that'll include a look at the weather, some of the course conditions for moving day, and what we can learn from that heading into Sunday. We'll talk through ownership in the large field GPPs, shots gained metrics, and building a player pool. And on the prop of the betting side, a complete deep dive of some of the round 3 averages and what we're expecting from Sunday as well. So you'll have a good idea of what to look at in some of your research and an idea of some pieces of exposure detail as well. But any questions you've got, any sort of deep dives you've got for me in the chat as well, feel free to go ahead and fire away. They got Rushing Yard down there early, as always, one of the true sweaty tryhards hanging out pretty much every live stream, it seems, during this fall swing. To anyone else out there playing on Sunday, best of luck with everything that you're going through. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing going. So first things first, scoring conditions today were really easy. In fact, the easiest by far of what we had the entire week. Part of that was the cut line, getting some of the outliers at the bottom end of the board out of there, but also the moving day setup itself. You had easy pin locations, even a few tee boxes that were slightly favorable, and that's why it played minus 2.91. And while we're not going to have a massive quote-unquote weather edge for tomorrow, mostly because of the placement points that we have in play, you do have to note that the placement points might not matter nearly as much when you have a minus 3 scoring average, and I do think it'll be slightly harder for tomorrow, so probably closer to minus 2, but we're going to expand on that when we get to props a little bit later on. But even with like a minus 2 scoring average, placement points matter, especially in 2 or 3 spots. You're going to need the winner probably second and third place. The 4th and 5th spot there, which in large field GPPs for like major championships or harder golf courses, a lot of times you need 4 or 5 pieces of that top 5 to get there. That might not necessarily be the case, because if you're an early starter or a mid starter that shoots like minus 8 tomorrow, that is going to outscore somebody that maybe just narrowly cracks the top 5, but only posts like minus 5 or minus 6. It's narrow margins, but when you're in the large field GPPs, those sort of things matter. So that's where the scoring average is more so coming in. And the reason why we're not looking at AM versus PM today is because we had threesomes off of both sides. So you had a big cut line. Also, it took a lot longer in the morning for them to finish play than I think the PGA Tour was hoping for. So they did go off of both 1 and 10. So that's why when we take a look at the morning versus the afternoon, there was a quote unquote 1 point, 0.98 shot difference actually between the morning and the afternoon, but there wasn't any sort of waves out there. So that was mostly the guys that were in the top 5, top 10 smashing, your mostly informed players. I'm sure that we're skewing that, but on the later half of tee times, we also had the players that just hardly made the cut line there too. So that's why it's kind of baloney when you're looking at these kind of splits, and why it doesn't matter as much for tomorrow's slate. But when we take a look at the weather for Sunday, it does look a bit different than what we've had for the first 3 days. Unlike the last couple rounds where it's been flat across the board, Sunday it looks like it's going to get spicy in the afternoon. And I didn't see the tee times before we got on here, but I was assuming that it'll be 2 sums off of 1. If they do 3 sums off of both sides again, then that'll scrap what we're about to say here. But conditions wise, the earlier teeing off tomorrow, the better it's going to be. And if it's the 2 sums off of 1 that I'm hoping for, some of the earlier starters and the guys that are going to be lower owned as well are potential leverage spots, because they're not going to have the placement point potential of the guys going off later. But like I just mentioned, with a minus 2 scoring average, and if it's close to the minus 3 that you had for today, then that'll be even more so the case. Nutted conditions plus also easy conditions where you can shoot something like minus 6, minus 7 is your other way to the optimal lineup. So if you're playing in the large field GPPs and you've been doing this for a while, you'll know on Sunday that you're going to have to take some of those stains at the top, some of those ugly pieces of chalk. The good way to offset it might be with some of these players that get that potential weather edge. So that's where I'm looking for some of my lower owned options, some of the guys that are sub 5 to sub 7% owned, to let me play a Michael Brennan who's out in first place. Let me play some of the guys that are, just a couple shots off of that first place mark, because you're going to have those pieces of chalk, some of the more popular players on the slate, and a good way to make sure you're not going to duplicate yourself with the entire field. Also to make sure that you're going to have leverage and move up in the GPPs when your players get there, is to get to some of these earlier players. And another thing to note is it will be cooler in the morning as well, but not as cool as what you had for today or even for Friday. Friday morning, it was 50 degrees. This morning, it was 47 degrees. They didn't start the round until much later, so that's why it wasn't really a factor, at least for round number 3. But for Sunday, Sunday, the super early guys might not be the best options. I'm talking your Higgs that's over par. RIP to him. He shot like +8 or some shit. But those kind of guys that are going off of your first 4 to maybe even like 7 to 8 groups, they're going to be in those cooler temperatures. So you might want to wait for some of the mid-morning guys that are playing just a little bit better and have a little bit more incentive to stay engaged. Because if you shot +8 the day before, you don't really have that much to play for on Sunday. You're almost guaranteed to be in that bottom 5 positioning. But if you played like just kind of spun your wheels, you shot like -1, maybe -2 today, and you're in that pack that's going off around 10 a.m., I think that is the ideal tee time zone. Again, we didn't have the tee times before. This is assuming that it's 2 sums off of 1. If they surprise us with 3 sums off of both sides, then we still have to try and take some of the guys towards the middle to the bottom end of the leaderboard. And that's just from the ownership perspective. But it would be nice to have this kind of a weather edge behind it. And you're not going to go too crazy with it, right? That's why I said there's no real weather edge, because you're going to have 3 or 4 guys towards the top. That's a non-negotiable when you're on a Sunday slate like this. But the 2 to maybe 3 guys that you're taking that are going off towards the middle to the first end of tee times are worthy, and especially in this kind of a weather scenario. Next thing, we're going to go through ownership at the top end of the board, and let's go through the top 10 highest owned players. And it's very predictable on the Sunday. We always expect that to be the players that are in the top 5, and that's exactly what we're getting. And because we've also had another round after the cuts, we don't have those massive gaps in the salary like what we had for round 3 that led to insanely condensed ownership in the 8K range. In fact, now when we take a look at this top 10 of the ownership, we have a couple 8K range guys in there. Like a Brennan, for example, is $8,000 flat. He's your leader. So he's, of course, going to be in your top 10 of ownership. But it was like 30 to 40% of the top 10 last time. Might have been even like half of the top 10 were players in the 8K range. Now it's Brennan and then a Kanaya and a Max Homa towards the bottom. So not the same kind of ownership distribution that we had from the day before, but still extremely skewed towards the top end of it. What's going on? Sites, welcome on in, buddy. We also got Jose down there as well. He said Kanaya means trader in Spanish. That faster Kanaya cost you $25. Yeah, man, I'm more mad at Cootie today. My guy Cootie hooked me by 0.5 on, it was an 8.5x slip, but I think it would have been like a 5x cash. We're close, and at this point we're like due. I hate to say that, but with all the 0.5 hooks that we've had this week, we're due for a pretty big one. So we're going to keep at it. The leans have definitely been there, and I hate to hear that on you, right? When you have those close little misses, they tend to be really frustrating, but it does mean that your process was dialed in at least. So I wouldn't hang your head too much about that, because, you know, if, for example, the guy was going the complete other direction, it would have been over a bunch of holes before that. So it's crazy how that works out. He says, "What's going on, my friend? You seem I'm some kind of wizard." I said, "Hey, I appreciate you, Nicholas Jones. Doing well though. We got football this weekend. There was UFC this morning, which was a kind of a different change, right? Normally we have that super late at night, but it was actually early today. It's been a good day. It's been a long day. Looking forward to tomorrow as well and all that football. But hopefully it's going well for you, my friend, as well." Let's talk through the top end of this. So Michael Brennan, I've got a 37% ownership. So this is pretty crazy. These, of course, are from my Patreon projections. So that's what we're looking at right now. But that's because of that -17 score. And sometimes the top end of the guy is like 40 to 50% owned. I'm pricing in people being scared of the fact that he's a new name. But we've also got to realize that it's like the first time that we've seen him on the PGA Tour in quite a while. The first time we did, he missed the cut and he lost like 4 strokes to the field. That's why his recent form over here is losing like 2.7 strokes per round. And a lot of his projections and modeling look as terribly as they do. But if you look at his PGA Tour America's stuff, he's like a transcendent talent. I mean, Data Golf's been posting stuff on him the entire week. He had like the 3rd best amateur performance of all time, and then went over to the Americas and had like the 3rd best developmental tour season of all time. So this isn't like some random guy. He's going out there and he's in first place. This is first time that a lot of us are seeing a Michael Brennan, but it certainly won't be the last time that we're seeing him on the PGA Tour. When you have somebody that's playing at that sort of a level on multiple tours, multiple levels, and back-to-back seasons, it's usually not by chance. So at 37%, I am going to be using him in some of my lineups. We're going to talk through some of the shots gained metrics a little bit later on, but they check out on him. He's been ball striking heavy. His irons have been dialed over the last couple days, and we've had him on the TV and on the broadcast for quite a bit this week. the guy is just dialed. I mean, you can see it. He talks over every shot with his caddy like he's Phil Mickelson. He's the kind of player that knows exactly how far he lands each iron shot. And he's not talking about like, oh, it's like a 60-ish shot. He was saying like 58.5 yards, and then he hit it to like 6 inches. He would say like 173 yards, and then he hit it like 175 yards just past it. Extremely impressive stuff. And he was in the final group today. It wasn't like he was, freewheeling it on moving day and he like moved himself up kind of sneakily. He was in the final group, had an early double bogey, would have shaken most people that were in that scenario. And he looked like an absolute baller from that point on. So I didn't want to give him too much credit until I saw it for myself. I got to see, the kind of stones that he has. Tomorrow is going to be the true litmus test on the kind of player that he is. If he wins, then he's somebody we're going to have to keep an eye out for. I mean, we've seen guys come out here and win out of nowhere like a Nick Dunlop. Dunlop's still somebody I think could be a transcendent talent someday, but it's I don't know. It's exciting to maybe have another one of those players out here on tour. Next up, we got Rico Hoey at 29% ownership. And I'm going to lump in a Kevin Yu here as well. Both of them are at minus 14. They're getting ownership because not only are they towards the top, but also they're in that 10K range. And people like spending all of their salary. Up right into $8,000 kind of fits this description, but it's even more so the case when you're a 9 and a 10K player, because if you've clicked in all of your favorite players and you've got like $10,000 left, you're not going to go to the 8K range and click one of your favorite 8K guys in there. You're going to go to the 10K range and just play somebody, because they're all the quote unquote best players that we have in the field. And I put that in quotes that I probably shouldn't have. They are the best players that we have in the field, whether it's the betting odds, the strokes lines on the sports books. They are the alpha dogs for a reason. So no crap, right, on these sort of options. So I will say that of these top 10 highest owned players, then I'm playing like half of them in my lineups. And it's not like round 2 and 3 showdown where I was a huge proponent of fading probably even 70% of the guys that we had towards the top. You can't really do that. We're in a round 4 showdown slate like this. You've got to have some of these players mixed in. And unless you have a real conviction about the 4 that you think gets there, you probably want 5 or 6 to kind of swap in and use as a core that you have towards the top. And you don't have to use 4 chalky guys all together. It can be 3. You can go a little bit lighter with it, especially because this is more of a birdie fest and closer to that -2 scoring average that we were mentioning. But you still have to have these guys to some extent. And it's not even just this top 10, but even like the top 15 highest owned players, the top 20, the guys that are starting with a chance to finish top 10, you're going to want a lot of those guys in there as well. So for the rest of the sheet, guys, you of course can find that on the Patreon page. That's where you can see like that 10th to 20th range. And though it is blacked out down here, the one thing I'll say about this 10th to 20th range is I really like them for this kind of a slate, because the placement points matter, especially like trying to creep into that top 5 when it's all said and done. Because it's a birdie fest, we know there's going to be like -6s and -7s. Even in the wind in the afternoon, you're going to get some guys that still shoot -6, -7. What's not to say that it's not these guys in that like 10th to 20th range that then sneak into the top 5, still get you some solid placement points. But more importantly, just to kind of circle back to the scoring aspect, scoring matters, especially when we're at a birdie fest like this. And we've got guys in terms of raw DraftKings projection that are in like the 40 to 45 point range. A ceiling performance is scoring like 60 to 65 points. That far outweighs the 5 to 10 to maybe 15 points you're getting on the side for your placement point potential. And it's less than main slate, right? Main slate, you get 30 points for first place. It's 13 points for first place that you're getting on Showdown on DraftKings. It matters, but it's not slate defining. Like you can overcome that, especially if you're somebody that's posting like 7 to 8 birdies. So those are players that I'm going to be jamming into lineups. And obviously because they're 10th to 20th on the leaderboard and usually in that 10th to 20th range with the ownership as well, they're slightly lower owned than these players towards the top. They're easier to get leverage on. In my opinion, that's where you want to be getting a lot of your action there. After Kevin Yu, Rico Hoey, you have past champion Matt McCarty. He's right there in striking distance at -15. In fact, there's a chance that he ends up higher owned than guys like a Yu or a Hoey. But if you take a look at the shots gained metrics, they're a little bit more favorable on a Hoey and a Yu. So that's why I have them as slightly higher owned. But all 3 very usable. And in fact, I hate to give away too much, but All 4 of these guys up there, there's a good chance that I'm playing them in my lineups. All 4 of them. All these studs that are in contention that are playing well and are super highly owned. And another thing to mention is I'm willing to use studs that are chalky on Sunday, not so much like the 6 and 7K range players, the guys that luck stacked themselves towards the top. You might find 1, 2 of those guys in my entire 150 max pool, but a vast majority of those chalk stands are going to be some of the better players in the field, because even like 6 and 7K range guys, when we're on a slate like this, are absurdly highly owned. Like, unlike rounds 1 through 3 showdown, where you'd be lucky to find somebody that's 5% owned to the 6K range, for round 4 showdown, after the cut line, that condensing helps with there being higher ownership on average. But it's not even just that. You've got guys that are 10% or even over 10% ownership in the 6K range. Towards the very top end of the 6K range, I think there's even somebody that's like 13 to 14% owned, maybe even higher owned than that at that portion of the board. That is exponentially higher than what we had for the first 3 days. That's why if I'm going to play chalk, I'm already a proponent of usually taking that towards the top if I'm going to use it, but especially in this kind of scenario where the guys down low, if they're going to be 15% owned, you've got to use them in like a third of your lineups to get that leverage. That's just, it's gross. It makes you want to throw up in your mouth. And if you don't want to do that, the better place to do so, in my opinion, is up top. You might have to play 40, 50% of these guys in the 9, 10K range, but at least you're playing 40 to 50% of somebody that's not an absolute slapdick. As my guy DGen75 used to say. I've been thinking about him a lot lately. He's an absolute legend, of course, still missing him. I know a lot of you guys in the community obviously share a similar sentiment to that. But yeah, Slapdick, I think he's the first person I heard that from. And I quickly adopted that myself because I think it's one of the best terms I think I've ever heard in this golf community. Let's keep this going. So we've got Haynes Springer at 7,400. He's the first piece of 7K chalk that shows up. I know for sure that we could classify him as some donkey chalk. Same thing with a Justin Lauer at $7,400. Both of these players at 20 to nearly 24%. You got to use them 40% of your lineups to get leverage. It's not to say that they're completely unusable, but you've got to love them and you've got to have rhyme and reason to want to get to that sort of player for it to make sense. So of these guys towards the bottom, like in that 7K range, vast majority of them are not making my lineups. I think there's one player that's chalk in that 7K range that I am using. The rest of them aren't making my lineups. But an Olsen, a Cootie, they're in that 9K range. They're kind of towards the top. They're a little bit further down the board, but they're like still 20 to 22% because they're in that 9K range. Again, that's just people spending their salary and trying to get people that have a chance to top 3 to top 5. And then a Kanaya, a Homa, they're pieces of chalk in the 8K range. And I guess it's worth pointing out as well, the 8K range, which is chalky the day before, we already talked about, you don't see a lot of 8K guys here outside of those two, and then a Brennan. It also has to do with the fact that they all sucked today. I mean, they all blew. They were all towards the bottom end of the board, like a Sahith, for example. Like your best players are like the Homa Kanayas that are here at like minus 11. That's why you don't see a whole lot of exposure in that range. So if you want to get different with the lineup construction, if you went a little bit more balanced towards the top and maybe didn't go double spend up like I'm going to be doing in a lot of lineups, you can tell, like if I'm playing a lot of these guys that are super chalky and expensive up here, then I'm probably going to be using a lot of them together if I'm getting that leverage. If you went to a more balanced lineup construction, though, this would probably be a GPP only sort of play. You could get to those 8K players, especially the ones that aren't on this top 10 list, and get a bunch of that leverage in there with like a Sahith, those kind of players that are closer to like 10% or even lower than that 10% ownership mark. But for the rest of the spreadsheet, guys, you guys can find that on my Patreon page. It has all my ownership on there, also my entire player pool and all of my projections. And like you can see over here to the right, these are all the player pool tags that I'm using for selecting certain players. You still have the top 4 like we've had the last few days: ball striking poppers, short game regression candidates, high upside players. So those are guys that make a lot of birdies. That's of course correlated to your Draftkings score. Course history from last year at this event. That was when it was the Black Desert Championship, by the way. So different name than this year if you're trying to look back at that leaderboard. And then lastly here, this is the addition for round 4. This is placement points. So like I said, you kind of got to jam in the chalk towards the top. And for some of the extra players that I'm using because of where they're starting, that's what this placement point tag is. But ideally, I would rather play guys, and this is what I do with my player pool tags, I'd rather mark them down as a ball striking popper if they're towards the top. These placement point ones are a little bit more of like a rare add for me because it's like I had no other reason to want to add them to the sheet. So they're going down as a placement point tag. So like, for example, a Brennan, we're going to go over his stats for the entire event. That's part of the reason why I think he's still a play for Sunday, but the round 3 stats aren't as impressive as some of the other guys that you have towards the top. So that's why I added that tag in there. But the really important thing to take away from this is to have an idea of why you're playing everyone that you're using. Have a rhyme and reason for it so you can vet it after the fact. You can try and figure out what went right, what ended up going wrong so that you can correct it after the fact, or try and lean into things that went really well for you even more the next time around. And also it helps clean up your exposure. It takes out some of the plays that you're just randomly throwing in there for no reason. And usually people's excuse when they're just throwing somebody in there for no reason is for leverage purposes. Here's the reason why that's baloney. You have multiple tags on here, birdie or better percentage, course history, for example, that almost every single player that you're going to in those 2 categories are a leverage play. You don't have to have just this random hat where you're picking names out of it and hoping that you're picking the right one to try and get it right for your round 4 process. Have something that you're leaning into. It can be bent grass putting. You can see that on my spreadsheet. That's the surface of the week. You can use driving distance. You can go par 5 scoring. I don't know. Like there's a million different key stats for this golf course or showdown in general. Like par 5 scoring, that's a way to just try and find guys that can make eagles. That helps a whole lot with your showdown score, of course. So like there's a bunch of different ways that you can go about it. Just have a process for building your player pool. And it should not be the exact same as what I have right here. I think that my tags are great. They work for me. I've been doing this for a long time and I've found quite a bit of success with this kind of strategy, but people have different ability of finding the plays that work for them, right? People have a better ability at looking shots gain metrics. People are better at just looking at people's past results at an event. Some people are really good at modeling for specific golf courses. Like whatever your strength is, whatever you find to be valuable for this specific week, lean into and use it as your own edge. Because if you're just copying what I have on here, and I always tell my Patreon members, you always want to have your own process, be working on it, and try and be better than me because you're playing against people that have the same tools of you as if you just take the tools from other people. Like you're only going to be as strong as what the tools are at that point. And I feel great about my tools. I have obviously had quite a bit of success, but if you truly want to be the best at whatever you're doing out there, you can't just rely on other people to do it for you. And I mean, that's what I do for myself, right? That's why I run my own website. I have my own projections. I run my own crew, do my own editing, all of that, so I can try and get better and I have control over that. And I'm not just delegating it out there and elsewhere and just kind of like not worrying about it, right? I'm worried about my process. I'm very hands-on about it. And that's what I love about these live streams and what we're able to do here together as well. So that's it for the player pool. We're going to talk about now how you can use the shots gained metrics to do so. Things like the high upside, that's just looking at birdie or better percentage for the year. Course history, of course, is just using something like this event history tab like I have on this spreadsheet. This is on the Patreon version for every single player that's in the field this week. Some of them missed the cut, but everyone that made the cut is on there too. All of that, these sort of things, you don't need the shots gain metrics for, but these top 2 you do. So that's what we're going to go ahead and go into now. If you have any players you want me to deep dive, now's the time to go ahead and throw them into chat. But before we do that, let's talk about the shots gained in general. And just like we did the last couple of days, I want to look at what happened today, and in particular with how people were hitting the golf ball. So shots gained ball striking is what I went out here and sorted this by. That is shots gained off the tee plus shots gained approach. Off the tee is how you're hitting your driver. Off the approach play is how you're hitting your second shot into greens. It's your tee shot on par 3s, but you get the idea. It's your iron part of your game. This is the part that's repeatable from day to day because that is involved with your golf swing. Shots gained around the green is when you miss greens. That's getting the ball up and down. It's how close you chip the ball to the hole. And then shots gained putting is pretty self-explanatory. It's your efficiency when you're on the green complexes. This around the green and this shots gained putting is extremely hard to predict. Even your best players on tour will have a lot of variation from day to day in those 2 categories. But where you don't see nearly as much variation are with these front 2 categories, the off the tee and plus the approach play. So that's why we sort this by shots gained ball striking. So guys like Avilo really stand out. He was your #1 ball striker, and he didn't do anything with the short game. So if he does this again, or even just gains like a stroke and a half, 2 strokes ball striking, and then does any damage with the short game categories, it could be low to back-to-back, really low rounds. Arika Hoey up next. He's been hitting the ball well the entire week, so not a surprise to see him doing it again, really all 3 days at this point. But he finally found a hot putter. That's what took him from being just a solid play to the absolute nutted round. So hopefully you guys were able to take advantage of that. That was something that we've shouted out multiple times this week. Chris Ventura also had a really good ball striking day, but he gained 2 strokes putting. So he kind of had his spike round today. So he's a good ball striker, but I don't know if he stands out as much as some of these other players do. Matt McCarty, he gained 3.3 strokes ball striking. In fact, 2.7 strokes with the iron play. So that's a pretty impressive performance there. Hayden Springer, also one of the best iron days. But you can see he gained 2.6 strokes putting. So kind of like a Ventura, you don't like to see these guys in like the bottom tier having that kind of spike performance. It's not impossible to happen in back-to-back days, but it does make it something that you've at least got to think about twice. But Hayden Buckley, for example, he gained ball striking, but did nothing with the short game categories. These are the sort of players that you'll see me using as, I was going to say like long shots or leverage plays, but it's not really the case, I guess. Like a Buckley, if we take a look at that, he's T19. He's right on the precipice of placement point potential, but unlike some of the cheaper options that are in the top 10, he's not going to be 20% owned. He's closer to like, I think 6-7% owned. I'd have to double check my spreadsheet to get the exact number on it, but he's not nearly as popular as some of the other players that are in the top 10. So Hayden Buckley's in my player pool for that exact reason, but a Kevin Yu, he's a player that's hit the ball well for pretty much the entire week. There's a Brennan once again showing up with the ball striking stats. That's what I'm doing with the shots gained off the tee and on approach. With the short game, if we take a look at some of the big poppers there, it's great to see some of these guys go low. Like good on them for gaining 4 to 5 strokes putting. But do I think that that's going to happen on Sunday? Absolutely not. Like Sebastian Moss, for example, if he were to be the number 1 putter for round 4, I would be utterly mind blown. Whereas if we go back to the ball striking stats, if Velo were to go back and be the number 1 ball striker again, it would not surprise me. And especially like Rico Hoey, him being top 3 in the shots gained ball striking again, wouldn't surprise me in the least. This category is where we're expecting a lot more turbulence. So a Carl Phillips, a Springer, an Olesen, a Jeremy Paul, a Hoey, and a Steven Yeager here are all players that I'm expecting to regress to the mean. And it's not to say that it's a complete death sentence on playing these kind of guys. In fact, I think there's 2 players there that I'm still using in my round 4 process. Especially if they're checking other boxes, like it can make up for the fact that maybe they put it over their head for round number 3. The other thing to consider too is ownership. If they're not like one of the most popular players that you have on the slate, then maybe it's not such a big deal that they gained 2 to 2.5 strokes putting. But if they are a piece of chalk, somebody that's getting a lot of extra attention, then maybe they're not worthy of being that kind of chalk, and you can exclude them from your exposure. So a few other guys that putted over their head, Paul gained 2.5 strokes putting, but he also gained 1.2 around the green. So that's a kind of a double whammy there. It's not really something you can do in back-to-back days that often. Steven Yeager, he gained over 2 strokes putting, but also about 1 around the green. Austin Cook, who I played today, had really good ball striking stats the day before. Today, he luck sacked it with the short game, which I wasn't thinking was going to happen. I used him in lineups just in case. And, sometimes you luck out. Sometimes you make a bunch of putts. Sometimes you chip in once or twice, like what happened with Austin Cook. But is he going to be able to rely on that on Sunday? No, of course not. I mean, he'll tell you that himself. So that's why a lot of these players will be fades that spiked in these 2 categories. Whereas if they lost a whole bunch of strokes putting, those are players that you might want to give a little bit of leniency to. So for example, Quade Cummins, he gained 0.86 shots gained ball striking because he gained off the tee, a slight loser on approach. But his big problem was the short game, where he lost nearly 6 strokes between the around the green and the putting. If he can even be a neutral around the green and putting and then gain 1.5 to 2 strokes ball striking, then that would be a very respectable performance, let alone the upside if he were to gain a couple strokes in the short game categories and then do the same thing ball striking. That would be one of the better rounds that we have of the day. So that's the upside of looking at these kind of players. And you don't do it blindly, though. It's not like losing the shots gained putting is a valuable thing, because it's not. That's not how we're looking at this. It's more so if they were okay ball striking, they were keeping it together, then it was really the short game where everything went awry. Those are the kind of bounce back candidates I'm looking at. So for example, Doug Gim, he lost ball striking, but it was only about 0.5 stroke to the field. He wasn't horrendous off the tee and on approach, but he lost over almost 3.5 strokes between the around the green and the putting. Harry Higgs, the same thing, except he did lose 5 strokes on approach. So maybe we don't give him the same pass as we do these top 2 players, because he actually was horrendous with that second shot, but he lost, what was that, 6 strokes or nearly 5 strokes with the short game stats. That's probably not going to happen in back-to-back rounds. Taylor Moore, he had a horrendous day, but he also lost a whole bunch short game. You give a little bit of leniency depending on the player. And around the green, you say a lot of the same about, but you've got to vet their ball striking stats. The one that really stands out here to me would be a Justin Lauer, who you can see gained with the ball striking about 0.7 strokes between those two categories, but lost 1.6 around the green. If he's a neutral there, cleans that up a bit, he's going to be closer to a 2 to even 3 shots gained day, which at T8 would pay off that price tag, give you some placement point potential as well. And that's what we're looking for with these shots gained metrics. But we don't just have to look at today. We can also take a look at the entire event. And what you'll see with Brennan is why I'm playing him for round 4 showdown, despite the ownership, is he gained 7.4 shots gained ball striking this week. He's been by far the best off the tee player as well. That's something that you can really count on. Rico Hoey, number 1 shots gained ball striking, 10.5 shots gained to the field. You can look at that, 7.4 shots gained approach over the first 3 rounds. Those are where a lot of my conviction plays are coming in. So going back to that placement point tag where, maybe somebody like Hoey putted over his head today, I give a little bit of grace to those players when their full 54-hole stats look as good as what we have right here. So that's what we have on Rico, and that's why I give him a pass in that category, and he makes my player pool. But you can also use these stats to your advantage. And I like to look at the putting to kind of look at who's been putting over their head this entire week. Nishia Paul, I don't know if we can count on that, especially Paul, who's gained like 10 strokes short game, and he's lost a whole bunch ball striking. Like that screams like negative regression like crazy to me. So that's somebody I'd probably be avoiding. But like a Springer, a Suber, even a McCarty has been putting over his head. But keep in mind that McCarty also lit it up putting here last year. So maybe it's something to do with the bent grass greens or just the surfaces themselves. He feels very comfortable putting in this desert style surface. So maybe you can give him a pass in this category. But some of these other players, especially if they're chalk and like 6 and 7K range chalk, then maybe you consider them as a round 4 fade. So those are the shots gained metrics. Let me see if there's any players that you guys want me to go through. If not, we're going to go through some prop stuff and give you guys a game plan for underdog and prize picks next. Let's see. He said slapdicks make the golf worth watching. He said somebody's got to pay the rake for sure. And every day there's a different slapdick out there, right? Whether it's the golfers themselves or somebody building some lineups that weren't quite going to get there. What's going on, Mr. What's going on, Mike? We got Mr. Bone Stingle in the chats. He said, made it home from your round just in time for the live. There you go. I'm assuming you're a West Coaster then if you're still playing golf at this kind of hour, but good stuff. He said, you don't think that it's been covered, might have a bit in the weather. Am I expecting scoring more like rounds 1 and 2? I would say it depends on when you're teeing off site. So yeah, you probably tuned in just after we did the weather segment. But yeah, afternoon, it looks a little spicier than what we have in the morning. So closer to 12 to 13 miles an hour sustained. Wind gusts also pick up from non-existent to closer to 15 to 20 miles an hour. So yeah, morning, I think it's going to play easy, like -2. Maybe even better than that, like -2.5, depending on the pin locations. That's going to be the real X factor on exactly where that lands. Afternoon wave, you are going to have the more informed players. However, they're going to be playing in the harder side of conditions. So that's the way I see it. And by the way, I didn't get to see the tee times before we got on here. They weren't published quite yet. I'm assuming that they're going off on 2 sums off of hole number 1. And yeah, if that's the case, afternoon probably plays a little bit more difficult. Now, do I think it goes the whole way back to like -0.7 like you had for the first couple of days or -0.35 in round 2? Not quite that far, especially because it's like the informed players, the guys that have played by far the best golf over the first 54 holes. That is going to slightly take away from that. So probably it plays like -1 to -1.5, I'd say, during the windy conditions in the afternoon. So let me know if that answers your question. If not, I can expand, of course. You're in Minneapolis, so you did hit the clubhouse for some food and beer after. Wow, there you go. So that's probably why I took a little bit of extra time. But yeah, I'm in Minneapolis. You're in Central Time, I believe. Yeah, you still have daylight till probably 7 something, huh? Over here on the East Coast in Florida, it's getting dark at like 6:40. It kind of sucks. I hate the winter for that reason. We're not even quite fully into winter at this point, and it's already kind of annoying. But let's go through these stat averages. So we're not going to have the prize picks or the underdog boards quite yet. That's been the case for rounds 1 through 3. For the community detail, that is something I'll be posting on X/Twitter as I have as well this entire event. Today's prop slip is the one that missed by 0.5. We had the 0.5 hook on Cootie's fairways, which was just absolutely heartbreaking. But like I said, if you don't have this 0.5 hooks, that means that you weren't close to begin with. So at least we were definitely on the right track there. But let's see if we can round off this week with a bit of a cash. And what we're seeing here on the screen are the averages from moving day. And not only was the cut line a big factor, but also the pin locations themselves, T boxes that made it play nearly -3. But the afternoon wind, as we kind of just talked about, that is going to really impact things, especially in the PM. And the setup should be a little bit more difficult too. They're going to put them in more trying pin locations. Birdie average isn't quite going to be 5.25 per round. In fact, if I had to put an idea on some of these overall averages, it would probably be -1.5 to -2. And that's for the entire day, right? That's not really saying like morning versus afternoon, but like -1 to -2.5 overall. Sorry, -1.5 to -2 overall. Birdie average, like 4.75 per round. I think it's going to go down quite substantially, and maybe even a whole half a birdie per round, down to like 4.75. The bogey or worse average, that'll go up. My guess is 2.75 per round. The wind is really going to impact that. And not only will the bogey average go up quite substantially, but your double bogey or worse average is going to go up quite a bit as well. And that's why the scoring average I have changing pretty drastically, even compared to some of the movement that we've had there. Because you can see like between just the birdie and bogey averages, it was about like a 1 difference, right? It was like half a birdie. It was like half a bogey or worse difference, a little bit more than a half a bogey difference, but you get the point. It was like a 1 quote unquote stroke difference. But the scoring average difference, I think it'd be up to even like almost a 2-stroke difference, down to like -1 if the winds really wreak some havoc in the afternoon. And it's not just because of the bogeys going up, it's because of the double bogey equity and even triple quad bogey equity that you have around this golf course because of the lava fields that surround it. So yeah, PM could get dicey. And kind of going back to that question we just had about like how difficult that PM could get. Yeah, like -1, I think, is in the cards. I was going to say like -1.5, some in that range because of the talent level. But that double bogey equity, especially with pressure, those are the guys that are under the gun that are going to be playing with by far the most pressure of anyone in the field. That could add on to that as well. So don't sleep on that. Fairway average will probably go down a bit as well. So that'll probably be like 11.6 per round. Not very much movement there because really only the PM side that will get more difficult from that perspective. And then your green average, that'll probably go down because of the tee boxes, also some slightly harder pins. But with the windy conditions too, this could go down to like 13 per round. I would say that the green average is probably the one that's going to change the most out of any of these different categories, but slightly harder conditions. It also depends on when you're teeing off on how you're going to project for tomorrow. And the other thing to consider too is that the morning guys will have the better conditions, but they're also going to have some of the worst form. So I'm not necessarily going to be running to the window to be slamming like the early tee times for unders on strokes or overs on birdies. I'm going to have to be very selective about it. Now, if it's somebody that has been hitting it well, but has just been screwed by the short game this week, then maybe I would be taking a shot. I'm that kind of guy that's going off early, but the shots gained metrics are going to be something that we have to vet, because if they've somebody that just cannot hit an iron for their life, then how are they going to set up the 5-6 birdie looks or the 3-4 birdie looks that you need to get to like a -3, -4 score? They're just not going to have those kind of chances to go out there and do so. So that's what we're doing for props. Looks like, yeah, like I said, -2 scoring average. And without having the board, it's really hard to say what we're actually going to do with our exposure, because the last couple of days, they've priced it far too optimistically. I mean, they posted guys at -3 today. I know the scoring average was -3, but nobody thought that was going to be the case. The slip that we posted, which ended up going with 2 hits, 1 miss, and 1 push, the value compared to the sports books was insane. Like, we had Justin Lauer at 69 strokes. He was posted at 70.5 on the sports books. We had, who was it for our fairway line? We had Cootie at 12.5. He was down to 11.5 on fairways on DraftKings. We had Thornberry at 5 birdies for an under, and then he was at 4.5, and he was juiced under at that sort of projection. Like, if they do that again, if they go out there and they post everyone at -3, maybe even some 67.5s, if they post all these guys at like 5.5, 6 birdies, then I'm going to be making fades all day. I'm not going to worry about it playing the -2, it being a birdie fest sort of conditions. If they take the bar too far and they just make it like you have to have an absolute nutted round, you have to birdie a third of your holes to go over your birdie projection, especially in guys that are average to below average players, the guys that are going to be in pressure in those windy conditions in the afternoon, there are going to be a ton of fade value to be had. But at the same time, if the lines makers the DraftKings, the Fanduel people look at this forecast and they overreact on the PM guys and they post them a stroke, maybe a stroke and a half higher than they should, then there could be a lot of undervaluing strokes or overs on birdies that we could be attacking too. So it's all really price dependent. That's always the case on golf. And we'll have to see what we end up getting at our disposal. But for the community detail, that'll be on X/Twitter, as I was saying before. And for every single piece of betting exposure that I'm taking for Sunday, you guys can find that on my Patreon page. Not only do I have the spreadsheets there for golf DFS, as I was talking about before, but also every single piece of betting exposure on sites like Underdog and Prize Picks. I have all those on there, every slip, also all the research behind it as well. Reasoning, the stat averages that you're looking at here. I also post weather forecast for all my members on every single day over there as well. And also all the Hard Rock Bet exposure that we're taking for matchups. We don't have those quite yet. Hard Rock Bet is really late to post when it comes to the matchup markets. But when we get those a little bit later on this evening, I'll be deep diving those and posting any sort of value that we have on the board. And we didn't have any today because of the overlap on rounds. Like I said, Hard Rock Bet is really slow to getting the boards up there. So when round 2 didn't finish till this morning, they just weren't going to have anything up for round 3. But our round 2 exposure, we had 5 that we ended up entering, and we went 3-1-1. Aldrich ended up withdrawing, so that was ended up refunding. But they were all like plus 200 to plus 275 free balls. So it was the big underdogs, right, in all those scenarios, and we cashed out 3 of them. We had one that missed, which is going to happen when you're taking those big long shots. But for all of that, you can find that on the Patreon page as well. But that's all I've got, guys. I appreciate your support on the channel as per usual. He said it looks like 3 off of both sides. That's good information to have then. So in that kind of scenario, we don't have to worry about the weather when it comes to props. And we will add on to this on the DFS side as well. So for DFS, we still have to have some like quote unquote early starters. And by early starters, the reason why I'm putting that in quotes, I don't mean like when they're teeing off. I would mean like if we were dealing with a normal tee time situation, your early starters are the middle to the bottom end of the leaderboard. We're still going to need some of those players for the leverage component. Like we're still going to have some sub 5, some sub 10 percenters, but it makes them slightly less of a priority than they were before. But at a birdie fest like this, where it's going to play -2, -1.5, -2 would say, with some of that PM win that they're getting, in that kind of scenario, you're still going to have some of those mid to early guys because somebody's going to go off and shoot -7, -8. So good call on that. Thanks for the information before we got off the live stream so I could add some information towards the end. And it does slightly change like where we're going to be getting our leverage and how much you should be throwing into your lineups, but it shouldn't drastically change like your player pool. Like you should have already had some leverage guys in there. Maybe you take 1 or 2 out that you had in there before, but that's probably about it on that one. Let's see. All right. That's all I've got, guys. I appreciate you. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. PGA Tour will be off this upcoming week. Week after that, though, we're right back to the action. So make sure you stay tuned for all the content coming for that event and for the rest of the fall swing and all of 2026. But that's all I've got, guys. Appreciate you. Hope to see you towards the top end of the GPPs. Let's cash out our prop exposure as well. Again, X/Twitter is where we'll be posting that slip. And until then, best of luck.